watching Fox News, and Sean Spicer announced that there are 5,400 people in this room. So thank you for coming out today. I 3 months ago, I never, ever would have imagined that I'd be standing in front of you as a candidate for U.S. Congress. And I imagine some of you in this room couldn't have imagined 3 or 6 months ago that you would be here tonight this early to listen to somebody talk about this. And after the last election in November, I woke up dismayed, but hopeful, because I do believe it's a responsibility of Americans to afford an opportunity to a newly elected president to perform. The same way that I would have hoped Trump supporters would have supported Hillary Clinton had she been elected president. It is a responsibility, though, and I did afford him that chance. The last number of months, though, and certainly the last number of weeks, made me gravely concerned. And that's one reason why I'm here today, because there's a time in everybody's life between this intersection of need and opportunity where you have to stand up. And I'm grateful for all of you for being here. Many of you are standing up. And that's what excites me about democracy. Well, actually, you're all sitting down. But those of you who are standing up, thanks for standing up. And then, Representative Paulson is not somebody that I abhor by any stretch. He is not Donald Trump, but he has been voting lock, stock, barrel along with Donald Trump, and I believe misrepresenting this district.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And I believe he is one of, well, there are 535 members of Congress, and because of the way that we finance campaigns, many are victims of this system where money makes people beholden to parties and special interests instead of their principles. And I intend to do this a little bit differently. Whether I succeed or not is going to be up to you and hundreds of thousands of other people, but I do believe we can do better, and that's what I intend to do, and that's why I'm here tonight. So thank you for joining me. I'm going to start. I'll start by just telling you a little about me, just a little bit, because this is a conversation and I want to do a lot of listening. And then I want to turn it over to you. I want to hear what's on your mind. I want you to share your opinions. But I also ask one small favor, and that is just to be respectful. There are Democrats in the room, there are Republicans in the room, there are independents, and gosh knows, probably some others. There are some people filming on behalf of the Republican Party and some of its interests, and I welcome them too, because that is participation. And I intend, if I'm successful in this pursuit, and I certainly intend to be, to represent everybody. Even a successful candidate in this day and age probably doesn't obtain much more than 50% of the vote of his or her district. And it's a responsibility as a representative to listen. Representative Paulson chooses not to. I am choosing to, and that starts with hearing what's on your minds. I will soon, and I will tonight, articulate some policy positions, but I want to be informed by you as to what matters. And then I will use my principles and values that I'll share with you tonight to inform those, and then most importantly, represent you in a way that I don't think has been done in a long, long time. So with that said, my birth father, Artie Peffer, went to the University of Minnesota on an ROTC scholarship. He grew up in St. Paul, lost his dad when he was 10 years old. His mother worked at a department store to make ends meet. And the ROTC scholarship afforded him the tuition he needed to attend the U and then law school at the U. And he chose to serve his country because of that ROTC scholarship instead of deferring, and was killed in the Vietnam War in July of 1969 when I was 6 months old, leaving my mother, Dee Dee, who's in the room tonight, a widow, and me without a father. And we moved in with my great-grandparents in St. Paul, and for 2 years, that's how our life was, until my mother remarried Eddie Phillips, and someone's got to have the phone. My mother married Eddie Phillips, which was an extraordinary blessing in my life, for him to adopt me. We went from tragedy to me being adopted by a family of great success, great ambitions, and most importantly, a family that recognized that there was a very, very thin line between advantage and disadvantage, and that it was incumbent on those who succeeded to take care of those that were on the other side of the tracks. And rest assured, there's going to be some mud thrown at me for being a out of touch, above it all, wealthy candidate. But let me assure you, and to anybody that might accuse me of that, I know better. I know how lucky I am. I know the responsibility of people like me to take care of those who aren't so darn lucky, especially in a country like ours. And that's why I'm doing this. When I was adopted in this family and brought up, so fortunate, I started my life right here in Edina. We moved to Edina. I went to Edina Highland School. I went to this library quite regularly, so to come back tonight as a candidate for U.S. Congress is particularly special, because this is where I came to not do my homework. I think I have a couple teachers in the room. And then I went to, my parents moved me over to the Blake School in Hopkins when I was a middle schooler. And in 1980, some of you might remember, plenty of you might remember, that John Anderson, a Republican congressman from Illinois, ran for president as an independent in 1980. And lo and behold, he came to my school and spoke when I was 11 years old. And I remember a couple things in his speech. I didn't know much of what he was talking about, but he said a couple things that still to this day inspire me, and that's one reason I'm here. He said you need independence in government. Without independence, parties take over and democracy is ruined. And he said money in politics is a great corrupter of our democracy and needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And then he spoke about a bunch of things I didn't understand at all. And that evening I went to dinner with my family downtown in Minneapolis, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, my brother, and me. And my grandmother, as some of you know, was Dear Abby. And she was fond of giving me advice. More than you could imagine. And she turned to me and said, "How was your day today?" And I said, "Oh, it was so amazing, Grandma. This guy who's running for president of the United States came and spoke to our class, and we couldn't believe it." And she said, "Before you continue, are you a Democrat or Republican?" I said, I don't know, Grandma. I'm 11 years old. I don't know. And she said, "Dean, you're a Democrat." So here Abby anointed me a Democrat in 1980. Here I am today. But back to growing up. In this family, there are two intersections in our family that are important: business and philanthropy. We are a family that believes business is a means to an end. That's how I was raised. That a job of a business isn't just to return profit to the owners. It is to recognize that there are a lot of people that made that possible. First of all, paying taxes. Without streets and without education and without educated people, it doesn't matter. Anybody that says I'm a self-made, anything is lying. That said, I also believe we pay plenty of taxes, but I'll get to that later. But our employees, we're a business that in the 1940s, my great-grandfather started what is recognized as one of the country's very first employee profit-sharing plans. And I have the documents that I keep on my desk because it's that important to us. We recognize that the most joy of creating a business is sharing success with those who make it possible. And then furthermore, investing in the communities in which that success is made. Those are founding principles of our family. And that's the intersection with philanthropy, which is where I've spent a considerable amount of my professional life, managing our businesses, growing them, and most importantly, returning a lot of that success to our communities. And over the last number of years, I've recognized that as hard as we work, as hard as we try to go upstream and make investments in kids and further social programs, that without sound government policy supporting those efforts, a lot of those dollars are wasted. And I believe there's a way to do a lot better. But it does start with good policy. And good policy can come from all sides of the aisle and all ideologies. But at the end of the day, I do believe if you put people first and work your way backwards and aren't beholden to special interests and parties, we can do so much better, and that's what I'm all about. And that's as much as you need to know about me. Okay? So with that, I would like to turn it over to you. You can add, there's anything is fair game. I'm not going to tell you I'll answer everything, but anything is fair game. And I'd love to hear what's on your mind. I'd like you to challenge me. I'd like you to enlighten me. And I'd like you to ask. Oh, I think there's someone who wants to speak. So I will turn over the microphone. Well, here, I'll just hand it to you and you can ask your question. And say your name and where you're from, if you would.
My name is Tim McGee, and I'm from Bloomington.
I'm very concerned, along with a lot of other people who are here tonight, about what's happening to healthcare. And I wonder if you would say a few words about your thoughts about healthcare, what you think ought to happen.
Okay. My thoughts on healthcare and what I think ought to happen. We're a country that affords public education to every single child in this country, regardless of income or advantage or disadvantage. And I've always found it a little strange that we don't put healthcare in that same category. Why a country of this kind of extraordinary success, the most successful in human history, doesn't look at healthcare the same way we look at education. Those are the bookends of life when you get down to it. So at the end of the day, I'd like to see healthcare provided to every single American, regardless of age, condition, or income. That's what I'd like to see. Look, I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders too, by the way, and I liked a lot of what he said. And by the way, he did a wonderful service to this country by speaking up and telling some hard truths to this country that I really admire. So I want to acknowledge him, and I also want to say that dreaming is easy. Anybody who's been in business knows that the idea is the easy part. Executing it is hard. Especially in a country that has a wide array of positions, perspectives, and ideologies. So what do I want to see? I want to see healthcare eventually afforded to all, somehow, some way. But I recognize right now there's an acute issue. You know, the ACA was imperfect. There's no question about it. I'd be the first to tell you that it needs to be modified. By the way, it would be nice if Congress started by simply upholding the law and making the investments that are required. Including the enforcement of the mandate, because without those younger, healthier, insurees, the whole system collapses. It's a house of cards, and that's the card on the very bottom. So that's the acute issue right now. The ACA definitely needs to be modified and enhanced. I know one thing: the AHCA is completely misguided. And I'm struggling to understand how any rational, principled person can argue otherwise. I really am, and I mean that very sincerely. Because the CBO, which is nonpartisan, I don't care how you look at this issue. If 20, and by the way, 23, 24, if it's 1 million people, folks, those are human beings, Yes. So yeah, I feel really strongly about that. And there's an age tax in that bill. As all you know. That's to me, that's not right. So I think that is a misguided bill. And I'm hopeful the Senate, even a Republican-controlled Senate, I do believe they see the misguided approach of this bill, and I do believe it's going to change if they do anything. And my hope, as I tweeted today, my hope is that they find a way to rectify the existing legislation. Yes. And our current representative, as you all know, has voted numerous times to simply just repeal it altogether without any plan, and then 2 times in the Ways and Means Committee and on the House floor to pass this legislation. That's not opinion, that's fact. You can all look at the reports, you can look at the CBO, you can research it yourself. I disagree with that. And that's how I feel. And healthcare, as I think I'm going to hear time and time again over the next number of months until November of next year, is probably going to be one of the most important issues that this country faces. And I intend to play a big role in a very vocal voice in trying to improve it. And I will say another thing about healthcare, because what we're talking about right now is simply reformation of insurance. That's one of the issues. That's one of the legs of the stool. The provision of care, and I have a little experience in this at the Line of Health System. I chaired the board and I served on the board, and I came to understand that the provision of care is where this all begins. We have a misaligned system right now that essentially rewards procedures and prescriptions, does not reward outcomes, and does not reward quality. And you can't run an enterprise. So I believe it's time to have that conversation. We devote this, let me say it this way, healthcare consumes almost 18% of this country's gross domestic product. That is almost double the developed world average. I believe that there's enough money in healthcare right now to cover every single American and provide quality care. There is a lot of money being pulled off the table by very smart enterprises. that can be redirected, I believe, to provide care, and where everybody can win. There's room for everybody. When we're consuming 18% of our GDP for healthcare, there's plenty of room in there, folks. And I intend to try to find a way, a bipartisan way, with thoughtful Republicans, to try to find a way to rectify that and be an enlightened country that leads again. Talk about making America great again. Let's start with doing nice things for people.
Yeah.
Right here in the front row.
Richard Laybourne from Bloomington. There's an issue that many people don't address, and I have a number of issues that I'm concerned about. But that's the issue of military expenditures. I guess we all know that Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial establishment. However, what many people perhaps don't know now is that over the past 20 years, 8.5 trillion, not million or billion, but trillion, have not been accounted for or have basically not been audited. 125 billion have not been accounted for. Now, I would like to find out what you would want to do about that particular problem.
Okay. Thank you. Well, what would I do about that problem? Well, I know when you run a business and there's $125 missing, you look into it. People have asked me, just because you're a businessman, do you think you can be a good representative in Washington? And I'd say, well, obviously by the residents of the White House, you're going to be a great representative. But I do know this, and by the way, this is not just limited to military expenditures. Government waste, my friends, is a big deal, and that is a nonpartisan issue. I'm a Democrat who feels that dollars are misspent left and right, that it is incumbent on representatives to look after those dollars, every one of them hard-earned and thoughtfully paid. As I mentioned earlier, we pay a lot of tax in this country. State, local, property, sales, income, corporate, you name it. Let's start by using those dollars better before talking about any increases. I don't think that's necessary. And I believe in a Congress that's filled with people who are there for the right reasons and are not beholden to any special interests or as many, and the military complex, if you will, in this case, can do a much more thoughtful job in looking after those dollars. But I don't think it's limited just to military. And by the way, I'll also say military expenditures in this country, a lot of the greatest inventions of this century have come from some of those investments in the military, which is troublesome to many, and I understand that. I think a strong national defense is terribly important, but the dollars should be well used. Dollars that go overseas should particularly be, looked after more thoughtfully, because who knows where those end up. And I share your concern. I'm a different Democrat than you might be accustomed to in that respect, and I will use my business experience to demand audits and to hold people accountable who need holding accountable. Yeah, let me go back in the back of the house and then come back up. And a nice giggle gets you a couple extra points.
All right, hi, I'm Emily McCarthy. I'm from Brooklyn Park. I've got a lot of questions. But I'm only going to ask, I only have two that kind of go together.
Okay.
One is that this district, the 3rd district, actually has a huge wealth and race gap in it. And I'm curious, A, how you plan to bridge that gap from, say, Brooklyn Park all the way up to Wayzata and Minnetonka? And also, how do you plan to continue to be informed on your constituents' wants, needs, views, if you do win and take office?
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to answer your second question first, which is I'm going to show up and I'm going to have town hall meetings. The sad truth about the last 6 months is the things that are suddenly becoming normalized concern me, including the simple responsibility of listening to constituents by holding town hall meetings, knowing you're going to be faced with questions that may be difficult, and knowing you're going to be faced with angry constituents who have the right to be listened to. So I will show up, I will hold town halls, as many as I can, because frankly, this is the joyful part of representation. So that's one. How do the gap, the racial inequality gap and income gap, there's no easy answer. This is multi-generational, has a lot to do with policy, has a lot to do with horrible history. I will tell you that a lot of my professional life in philanthropy has been dedicated to both understand the whys and, most importantly, invest a lot of our family's resources in trying to rectify those whys. We've been spending many years and countless hours and many millions of dollars, particularly in North Minneapolis, where these gaps are as wide as anywhere in the state. And it's in the backyard of the most prosperous city in the entire state of Minnesota, and deeply troublesome to us. And we believe that every child, regardless of where the child is born, to whom the child is born, and under what circumstances the child is born, is entitled as an American citizen to be afforded an extraordinary education. Not a good education, a great education.
Healthcare.
What's that?
Education and healthcare.
And healthcare. As I said, the bookends.
Yep.
Right? And by the way, I will say on those subjects, we have a public education system, and there are alternatives, and the same would be true for healthcare. There should be public, I believe, ultimately, and there should be private. That's a free country. People should have options. Back to education. Everything starts there. If a child has an education and has at least one person that believes in him or her. By the way, we've done a lot of research, and we're starting to find that if a child has just one person that believes, that just one person believes, an entire life can be different. So we invest heavily in mentorship, in scholarships, and I won't even go through the list. You can look at that perhaps on your own. But that's what we believe. And I want to look at things like, why don't we develop like a Peace Corps, but of retirees who have wonderful experience? Who can go into schools and support teachers in classrooms and mentor kids. Because it's not about teaching. Teaching, we got great teachers, we need more good teachers, but mentorship and someone believing in you makes all the difference in the world. That's not an expensive policy issue. That's not something anybody would really disagree with on either side of the aisle. And it's simple things like that that I've learned that I think we can at least approach and test and do better. I could go on for hours and have a wonderful conversation with you about a myriad of other ways that we can do better in that respect. But I want you to know that as a family that has known its share of persecution in the past, and was disadvantaged well before it became advantaged, and fled a country that was persecuting our family to come to this extraordinary country. The people we think about most are the ones that are facing the same circumstances that my family faced 5 generations ago, and that's what's on my mind, and that's what I intend to recognize.
Nancy Schumacher, Coon Rapids. Women's issues, women's rights. I want to hear you speak.
Women's issues, women's rights, I want to hear you speak. I might write a song about that. I'm the father of 2 teenage daughters. One who's 19 and one who's 17. And when they asked me why I was doing this, I encouraged them to go to Emily's list and look at the voting record of our current representative. And they did. And there's nothing I could have said or done that would have inspired my daughters to support what I'm doing than having a look at that. I believe women, well, first of all, my mother's in the room. I think mothers should be paid more than anybody. And I mean that sincerely. Women should be compensated at the same level of men doing the same job. That shouldn't be an issue. Women should be able to make their own healthcare decisions regardless of what other people. And the fact that that has to be met with applause like, yeah, I wish more people felt like that is freaking ridiculous. All right, good. This man says I'm solidifying his support for Paulson. And I respect that too. So I feel strongly about women's rights, about equal rights for everybody, civil rights. That is in my DNA. And as the father of 2 daughters, I will not let them down. I rest assured, I will not let them down. And boy, I wanted to see a woman become president in the last election because I wanted my daughters to know that anything is possible. talk about the right side of the aisle. And go back here. In the green.
Lisa Kelber, I'm moving to Edina in June, and I'm concerned about public transportation, particularly about the light rail. I'd really like to see the light rail go around the 494 loop. And I think that's one of the biggest indicators of economic disparity in the country, and that most low-income people use public transit. And I mean, I've used the light rail to go to the airport. So I'm wondering, it's partially done by the state, but it's partially funded by the federal government. And I'm wondering where you stand on transportation and what you plan to do.
So the question's about transportation investments. Back to my philanthropic work, I recognize the importance of affording public transportation to people for a whole host of reasons. One is because of economic disparities. For many people, that's the only way to get to a job. Secondly is, I care about the environment, and I'd like to see fewer cars burning fossil fuels on the street. You know, there's a lot about, well, our country is the best country in the world. There are also a number of countries that have made much more substantial investments in rail and transportation. Any of you who've been on a bullet train in Japan or on the rail system in Europe would say, and come home here and you wonder, why? Why is the greatest country in the world? So more specific to the light rail here, it's an important question. It is not terribly germane to U.S. Congress, but although federal investments in transportation certainly are. It's not my place to opine on the light rail line that's being debated, the Southwest line right now. But in general terms, yes, I recognize the importance of public transportation in trying to solve economic disparities, particularly ones that run into neighborhoods that don't have the advantages that many of our neighborhoods have. It's terribly important. And it's also important because it inspires developers to invest along those corridors. And the greatest cities in the world, as you all know, are ones that have invested heavily in infrastructure. And if there's something I agree with the current president about, it is investments in infrastructure, believe it or not. Boy, if I go to Washington and he wants to make those investments, I'm all over it. I'll be the first to say that. Because that's not about politics or even about him. That's about what this country needs. And if he doesn't raise his hand and actually fulfill it, I'll try to be one of them that does, because it's terribly important.
Mark Chu from Bloomington, Minnesota.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, so there's kind of I'm going to admit this is kind of a little bit of a selfish concern when I say this, but I've been noticing a growing problem in this country in regards to student loan debt. I'm one of them. I have over $80,000 of debt still on my head right now. And with the moves of the administration to, in particular, remove protections from student loan debt from borrowers who are in default, and now reading about it today where Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos is moving to merge all student loan companies that oversee collection of this debt into one single company that's going to amass a value of about $1 trillion. I mean, it greatly concerns me in my generation in particular because, well, we live and die by that student debt. If we default on our loans, our credit is history. And I'm already paying myself over $600 a month to my student loans just to keep myself from going into default. What are you going to do about this?
Thank you. Yeah, it goes back to education. You know, the fact that with all the wealth in this country, that so many have to take on so much debt simply to afford themselves, the achievers have to afford themselves an education to take on that kind of debt and start in the hole is shameful. I think it's wrong. Every question we're going to talk about tonight, though, has a cost. There's no question that for me to get in front of you and go through the wish list of things that I'd like to see is easy. You know, how to pay for these things, that's a little more difficult. But I do believe there are some solutions to this. I think one thing, what you first brought up was, why is student loan debt treated differently? Why can't it be discharged in bankruptcy court? It's absurd. You can discharge any other debt, stupid debt. I'm talking about debt people take on for making dumb decisions. And yet the debt you take on to better yourself and to become a providing, productive member of our society is really shameful. And that should absolutely be changed. Don't get me started on Betsy DeVos. I never,
Keep going. Keep going, please.
Look, I'm I'm proud of our country, and I'm embarrassed by her. Not because, I'm not going to opine on what kind of person she is even, I'm just opining on the fact that she's not prepared for one of the most important responsibilities in this country. As I said when I started this evening, I wanted to hear what's important. I'm glad you brought that up. I know it's important. What's really interesting, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, and whether you go to other ones of these, and there are some other wonderful people seeking the same DFL endorsement that I am, sharing your personal stories is what changes people. It makes it personal. When you read 23 million people are going to be thrown off, or will probably lose insurance if this bill is ultimately passed. That's hard to reconcile. When someone tells a personal story that you just did, it changes things, and that's why I wish our representative would get in front of people and hear more, because that's what it takes. So thank you. Oh, I was going to go right back here.
Okay, hi, sorry for the false start there. My name is Maggie, I live out in Chaska, and I think that I actually drove near you at Target. Yeah, that spaz waving, that was me. Yes, it was great, it was really magical, yeah. The questions that have been asked so far have been very substantive and pretty policy driven. Mine is a little bit less tangible, but a little bit more philosophical. Particularly in this last election, I mean, none of us really like it every 4 years when there's a presidential election. We can't talk to certain family members and it gets really awkward. But this felt different. This felt visceral. This felt very primal. This felt like we were watching like the end of human decency just in front of us in many ways. And you know, regardless of policy, I mean, nobody who likes Donald Trump can even pretend that he's acting like an adult. One of the things that we would really like to see from this district is a return to that decency, but more importantly, an actual voting record that can back up that decency. Because it doesn't matter if you're the nice guy, if you're voting for healthcare, it doesn't matter. Aside from how you plan to vote, what examples do you plan on setting for people to return us to this level of not just politeness, but decency and goodness, where we can look these family members who are different than us politically, but that we can have conversations and be constructive? What ways do you intend to demonstrate that for us and for our children and everybody?
Thank you. You had a few things in there. Starting, I don't want to talk a whole lot about Donald Trump tonight, but I do want to recognize something even more important than him, because he was a vehicle. People are angry, and some of you are, and for good reason, I believe. But this election was a wake-up call, and that there's a lot of people hurting out there. And regardless of your opinion on him, there are a lot of people hurting that saw as their only way to be listened to, which is, to me, this is kind of a metaphor for what I'm talking about tonight with Eric Paulson. People just want to be heard. This is what America is all about, is people like me standing in front of you, being one of you, and listening, and then trying to represent your interests in Washington, D.C. And that doesn't happen so much anymore. So he tapped into that. And I do give him credit for that. He tapped into anger. So I want to just acknowledge that. Decency, it's fundamental. I'm a philanthropist, and that's two roots linked together. And it means love of humans. It's not about money, it's about loving people. I love people. That's one reason I'm doing this. That to me is my purpose. That's what a country like this is all about. That's how we got to where we are, because we love each other. And I want to see that happen again. And it is my belief that there are going to be a lot of people like me standing up right now. And with the support of people like you, we can change this. I say, it sounds like a dumb slogan, we can do better. But you know what? We can do better. That's what I want. I relish sitting around tables with people who feel very differently than I do, and listening to them, and then them affording me the same opportunity to listen, to my perspective, and then hashing it out. Anybody that's been in a relationship, anybody that's been, that's how life works between human beings, and our whole country is predicated on that, and I really relish the opportunity to bring a little bit of decency, a lot of decency, back to Washington, D.C., and thoughtfulness. And I do believe this starts with campaign finance reform, which is a big issue. It's probably over the minute that people become beholden to interests other than the people that they represent, this all falls apart. All falls apart, and decency is lost, and principles are foregone, and I won't allow that. And I want to play a role in making it nicer.
I'm Rick Bloomfield from Minnetonka. My question to you is, I love your, it sounds like your positions are good. The question I have is, I think Paulson, is he a four-termer at this point? No. 5. So he's a bear to beat, and he's great at marketing, and he's moderate, and he's not moderate. When he does all these things to position himself as moderate. So can you walk us through like some of the, how do we educate people that he's not moderate, that he goes out party lines, that he's not what he appears to be, the perfect family man?
Well, here's the good news. The 3rd district here in Minnesota is one of the very last true swing districts in the United States of America. Okay? It is one of the best educated, it is one of the highest income, most engaged districts in this country. And I would argue the way this district goes in the next election is a bellwether for many, many years to come. And I believe, and I know, I've had more Republicans reach out to me proactively in the last 3 weeks since my candidacy. To learn about me, not even so much about policy right now, about principles and values. I've had a number of them say that we saw in Eric Paulson a reincarnation of Jim Ramstad. And by the way, if Jim Ramstad was our current congressman, I wouldn't be running. And look, I'm the first to admit this is a big uphill battle, folks. You know, Hillary Clinton won this district by 10 points, almost 10, 9.5, I think. And Terry Bonoff lost it by about 13. It was about almost a 24-point swing. This is not easy. And a Democrat hasn't won this seat since 1958, which is a little bit before I was born. So I don't look at this with rose-colored glasses, my friends. I know it's going to be an uphill battle, but I also have great faith in this district, and I have great faith in people who often don't even consider the candidate on the other side of the ticket, because things have changed a lot since November of last year. And I don't have the hubris because I've been in business that I think I know how to do this, but this is going to be a Minnesota campaign. I'm keeping money in Minnesota with agencies and people and management. I am not taking direction from Washington, D.C., because I think, frankly, that is what has happened. And I believe I can combine some of those experiences with the best of experience in this world, the political world, and do this better. And that starts, this is my job, every day meeting people. And I'm going to be driving in parts of this district that many of you probably haven't seen before, and I'll do it joyfully. And I'm going to do it one person at a time. When you're in business and you're building brands like I've done, it starts with one at a time. And you have to have patience, and you have to have fortitude, and you have to have decency, and you have to have good ideas, and you have to listen. And I think we can do it. But I can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. I need you. And I don't just need you. I need you to tell your friends. I need you to tell your conservative friends, that I'm independent-minded. I'm not going to appeal to every single Democrat, and I'm not going to appeal to the far-right Republicans, but I do believe my principles and values align with just about everybody, the massive 90% in the middle. And I think if I have the opportunity to tell my story and you help me do that, we can do this. And if we do it, this district will go from one that is almost unknown in this country to one that is actually nationally recognized. And believe me, if we win this, and yeah, I hope it's me, but if it's another candidate, who we choose to represent us in the next election as a Democrat, and he or she wins, I will be joyful about that, because it will be the first time since 1958, and let me tell you, that is not just national news, that's bellwether national news. So I think we can do it, and we will. Thanks.
Paul Lane from Bloomington. Two quick questions. Number one, I'd like your views on the concept of mandatory national service for young people. Number two, 2 years ago, there was a young man by the name of John Phillips who about this time announced to run, and the minute Von Huff came off, he bailed. How do we know you won't do that?
Well, I'll start with your second question first. You have my word that I will not bail. And this is just too important to bail. And I intend to stick this out and go as long as you are willing to take me, because I can't take you, you have to take me. And I mean that with all sincerity. Your question about national service is an extraordinary one, because some of the cultures around the world that I honor the most are ones that actually implore national service. And by the way, that doesn't just mean military service, because I don't believe that that is the only answer. I do believe we should have national service in this country. I think we'd be a better country. And we should afford those choices. If you want to join the Peace Corps, join the Peace Corps. Right? If you want to join the military, please. We need members of the armed services in this country. And if you want to volunteer in schools, we should have a national Peace Corps, a national school corps. There are so many ways, and boy, the greatest experiences of my life have not been the ones where there's a profit motive. It's been the one when people were affected in a good way. When I was a camp counselor, when I was in college, the year after I interned for Senator Patrick Leahy on Capitol Hill, I was a camp counselor at the camp that I went to in Maine. And it was the most joyful summer of my life at that point, because of the responsibility and the way to make a difference in young people's lives. And I recognized right then and there that I wish every person my age could be a camp counselor for 1 year. So I think that would be an extraordinary achievement. And again, I think that's something that both parties could agree would be beneficial to this country. So I feel strongly we should consider that, and I'm glad you brought it up. I'm going to go to the other side of that. Oh, the front row.
Hi, my name is Claire Severson. I'm from Eden Prairie. So I will preface by saying that I am incredibly pro-choice, but I also recognize that we have a number of single-issue voters who are pro-life, and they will vote for the pro-life candidate. So what I want to know is, how do you plan to address people who are pro-life?
So I'm very pro-choice, and I said it earlier because I believe that women should reserve the right to make healthcare decisions in their best interests along with their physicians. And truth is, I have equal compassion for those who believe that life is so precious that that shouldn't ever be allowed. But because I recognize that that's an example of humanity where everybody should be respected. And for any of us to not honor people who thoughtfully convey those feelings, I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves. I really do. These are not misguided people for the most part. Some on the fringes, yes. But for the most part, they care about life, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, and we are a compassionate country, and I understand that. What I believe in is the right to choose is elevated ever so slightly above that, because I, as a man in particular, should never play a role in that decision.
Amen.
I'm glad you brought it up, because it's another example of, no matter how you feel on this subject, and I honor both, everybody wants to see fewer of them. Yep. Right. Everybody in this room, I imagine, wants to see fewer abortions. I'm one of them. And I also feel strongly that the best way to do so is to invest in Planned Parenthood. Yeah. You don't have to study a lot of policy to know that that's probably the biggest difference maker in reducing abortions, and thankfully they have gone down over the last number of years. So I believe we should invest in those. Do I understand why some taxpayers don't want their dollars used for abortion? Yes, I do. But there's a big one here, and that is that Planned Parenthood needs resources of ours to try to change this and to try to affect it, and that's how I feel. And I believe compassion is my responsibility, and frankly, I think that's a challenge to all of us in the room, to start bridging those conversations. And I think we can have some more agreement if people are willing to be decent about it and stop the fighting, and all come to the same conclusion that we should try to reduce abortions. You know, that's how I feel.
Thank you.
I wondered,
yeah,
pardon me, I have a name. My name is Frank Malley, I'm from Minnetonka.
Hi, Frank.
What can you do about these ongoing onslaughts discrediting our public schools and the attempts to constantly steal funds from them?
Unlike Betsy DeVos, public education is, in my estimation, and actually amongst many of the developed world, many recognize our public education system to be the great difference maker in making America the country that it is. I also believe that we are using, in many cases, 19th century teaching models to educate 21st century kids. I think those are both truths, and I think they're both right. And friends on both sides of the aisle who claim that we can do better in education, I think they're right. Okay. I spent a lot of time in public schools. Mari Melander, the principal at Lucy Lane in North Minneapolis, I've learned more from, because she is someone who started in public schools, went to charter schools, and then came back to Lucy Lane because she saw the drain that the charter schools were taking from her public school and felt it was her responsibility to take care of the kids back at Lucy Lane who didn't have the engaged parents. So here's my perspective on this. I'm about innovation. The successes in our families' businesses have come from thinking a little bit differently and doing things that hadn't been tried and pushing the envelope a little bit. And in that respect, charter schools only formed because our public schools, in some cases, were either devoid of the resources necessary to educate kids, or simply didn't have the right people doing it, or the system wasn't right. So I do believe in a country like ours, there should be laboratories. And I frankly wish the public school system was better set up to accommodate some of those tests. That's how I feel. Coming back to the fundamental question, if we don't, and when I say invest in public schools, I do mean invest money, but it is not just about money. It is about elevating the profession of teachers, rewarding them more. I helped build a school in India. I've spent countless days and hours in charter schools, public schools, private schools, parochial schools. I've served on the board of a university and of a secondary school. So I have a sense of what goes on in these places, and they all play a big role. We have to recognize that people who send their kids to private schools or even charter schools are doing so because they want their kids to do better. And I believe we can. We can't just throw money at it. We have to do it better. We have to, I got lost track. We have to elevate the role of teachers, and not just by compensation, but by encouraging the very best and brightest of our young people to pursue paths in teaching. And I was saying that I built schools in other parts of the world. It doesn't matter if you have a cinder block, one-room school, but you've got a great teacher. It doesn't matter. You're on your way. And we have to elevate the role. We have to have the best principals in the world, because leadership is fundamental in schools. And it's not a money issue. It's a cultural issue. It's all about us elevating these categories of professions and demanding high standards for them. I'm all for high standards for teachers and principals. And it should be one of the most prominent careers in this country, as it is in other countries around the world. So I believe it's a combination of ample resources. I will tell you proactively, I'm opposed to vouchers, because I think that drains public schools of resources. But look at, then we have a responsibility collectively, our country, to do better in public education, folks, because we cannot stand pat, and teachers' unions have to be part of the solution, to collectively. And I believe we can do that. But it takes a recognition that charter schools are not bad by definition. They've occurred because people do care. And let's do it collectively, and let's improve public schools, and we can do it together. How was the middle of this section?
Hi, I'm Jean Wiley from Edina.
Hi, Jean.
And I have 2 points. One, to speak to your story, thinking about personal stories. A middle-class person here Both my husband and I worked in public service, so we're not wealthy, although we do have an Edina address. We raised our kids in, I'd say, middle-class comfort. My grown daughter and son-in-law are now struggling to simply maintain that lifestyle, that level of middle-class living. They were homeowners for 3 years, had to sacrifice their house in order to pay some of their student loan burden. This is real. Between the student loan burden and daycare expense for their 2 little children, whom I dearly love, they're barely making it. And this is awful in a country like America. This is not the American dream. They shouldn't be sinking lower than their parents' level of achievement. I mean, it's just not right. So, secondly, on education, if you're interested in innovation, look at Intermediate District 287.
Okay.
They are the most innovative, the most competent.
Which district is that?
Intermediate District 287. There are 3 of them in the state.
Yeah.
There's 2 other numbers I can't remember. But I worked for Intermediate District 287. I know them. They're innovative. They're high-skilled, high standards, and they provide excellent service. And if you want innovation, look at what they're doing.
Thank you. I will. To your story again, the personal stories of challenges that everybody's facing. You know, if we don't have a strong middle class in this country, forget about it. And I, you know, a lot of people ask me about tax policy and about trickle-down economics. And I say in some cases, and I'm going to weave this into a little bit of story, trickle-down economics works in some cases. When the government affords big defense contracts to companies, that does work. It provides a ton of jobs, develops new technologies, we sell it overseas, it does trickle down. But in the businesses that I've run, which are mid-sized businesses and now a small business, a coffee shop, I've come to the conclusion that by putting more money in the pockets of middle-class Americans, and say another $1,000 a year, they might buy another pint of ice cream every week. And they might come in down and have another, few dollar cup of coffee at my coffee shop. That means that's creating demand. And that helps me pay our employees a living wage. And that's how the economy actually does really, really well, is when middle-class families have a little bit more, because when people like me get another $1,000, I'm grateful for it, but it doesn't change my spending habits. So anybody who argues that a tax cut for people like me is going to spur the economy is full of... So I want to say to you that if I'm ever so fortunate as to represent you and your family in Washington, that's exactly what I want to try to achieve. Exactly what I want to try to achieve. And there are a lot of ways to do so. And I agree, and I think there's a lot more agreement on this subject than is currently being portrayed from Washington. And I want to be one of those voices that encourages us to work together to do just that.
Colleen Miner from Edina. And going along with what you were saying about being middle. You know, every day we get up and we turn on the television and it's like we receive a body blow. Everything that we find decent and worthy, EPA, climate change, you name it. I mean, we're devastated by that. But this is my question to you. Is there anything in the Republican agenda that you agree with and that we would find to our benefit?
Yes.
That's it?
Well, I'll start by saying national health care is a Republican idea, believe it or not. There are a lot of great Republican ideas. In fact, I would argue just as many Democratic ideas. And I don't want to point out particular elements of platforms, because I'll tell you that the fact of the matter is I'm independent-minded. I wholeheartedly agree with most of the Democratic platform, not 100% of it, but I share with you my principles and values of what matters to me. And I would argue that there are a lot of representatives on the other side of the aisle that would feel the same way. And if you look at what's going on in their primaries, it's pretty obvious that not everybody agrees with everything in that platform. You know, if you ask people what the Republican brand stands for, some random person in the street, they'd probably say smaller government, lower taxes, strong national defense. Those aren't bad things. I would argue that the Democratic brand is imperiled right now, because if you ask the same people what it stands for, it depends how long you have. So what I'm trying to say is that no party has a monopoly on ideas. I refer back to Hubert Humphrey in 1948, young mayor of Minneapolis running for Senate, speaks to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. And he implores to the arena, it's time for us, the Democratic Party, to get out of the shadow of states' rights and into the bright light of civil rights. And Democrats in mass walked out of the room. And that was during the lifetimes of some of you in this room, not that long ago. And I would argue that if you look at my website, I don't have a label on it because I don't like the labels, right? I wish we didn't apply these labels, because we would frankly have a better system of governance, and I know our founding fathers and mothers would be really disappointed in us that we've gone into two corners and simply fight it out, instead of taking off the labels, portraying our principles and values, and representing people's interests. My best answer is that I am a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat for a whole host of reasons. And if we are going to succeed, we need to embrace more Republicans and try to do it a little bit differently. And if that can be our legacy, my friends, wow.
Okay, so I'm going to build on what you just said. Yeah. So in 3 sentences, tell us what the Democrat message should be, just like what you did for the Republicans.
That's one of the best questions I've had. I might just tell you how great it is so I can think of a good answer. Yeah, how much time you got? Yeah, I believe that human rights, the respect and affording opportunity to every single person, regardless of sexual orientation, color, race, religion, achievement, advantage, disadvantage, should be the fundamental element of the Democratic platform. And that means, by definition, that means everybody. We need to distill a message into some more comprehensible, identifiable parts. And I believe that's not something I should articulate. I think that's something that from these sessions with you, as I listen to what's important, as I go through this process, for 15-hour days for the next year and a half, God willing, I will learn, and I promise you, I will come and present to as many of you that want to listen what I believe our platform should look like and how we should articulate it.
Rosie Rocco, Maple Grove.
Hi, Rosie.
I want to circle back to the question about the district. And so the divide, I think, was perhaps being referred to in some respects, was in the past campaigns, we've seen little action north of 394, lots of action south. So, A, do you plan to head to the libraries north? Then I want to say that I'm pro-choice and pro-life. And given your support for women, will you sign on to repeal of the sunset for the ERA? Since paying women equally will add $200 billion into the economy every year. And my last is, has your grandfather Mort endorsed you?
One of the great challenges of this pursuit is remembering in order the questions that people ask. So I'll start with my 98-year-old grandfather Mort, who is reaching the end of his life, is fair to say, I believe. And yes, he wholeheartedly endorsed this pursuit with joy. And I know in his heart and head, reflecting on the fact that 120 years ago, for a family to flee persecution overseas, be welcomed into this country, and afforded the chance to do better in a safe environment, and then to see one of the grandchildren, 5 or 6 generations down the road, even be in the position to do this, because there was a time not long ago where that probably wouldn't have been possible, is very joyful to him. And I hope I have the chance to see this through while he's still alive. That's one. I wholeheartedly endorse the Equal Rights Amendment. Wholeheartedly. Sometimes I should just leave it at that. As for geographic disparities. Yes, I cannot wait to come to every single of the far reaches of this district and meet and greet, including the most red districts. And that's why any of you in this room, yes, I would love your support. There's no question. I need your support. I'm not taking PAC money. I'm not taking lobbyist money.
Yeah.
I'm not here and I'm also, I'm not going to entirely self-finance a campaign because I don't think that's what this country should be doing. I don't think we should just have candidates of means and candidates who are the public. So that means I gotta work twice as hard and I gotta go twice as far, and I'm doing that joyfully, and the answer is yes, I wanna have these gatherings with 5,400 of you in every room. And I encourage you to reach out to me and my campaign and extend invitations if you'd be so kind. I want to come visit you. I want to do kitchen table visits. I want to do library visits. I want to meet everybody that's willing to at least sit down and have a talk and change the conversation. So the answer is absolutely. This is the first of many, and I like how this is going so far. So I think I want to do more.
The border. Kelly Gunshin in Plymouth. Can you talk about your view on the immigration and refugee problem?
Thanks, Kelly. Are there any Native Americans in the room? Did someone raise their hand? Okay, first of all, okay, I don't mean to point anybody out, but that's joyful to me because, but for you, the rest of us are immigrants.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty pragmatic person, and that's kind of my independent mind. There are, by some estimates, 10, 12 million undocumented or illegal immigrants in this country. And there are a couple of truths here. One is that they are here illegally. They broke an American law. And I do believe that there is a process, what I would call, not amnesty, but redemption. If you break the law, you pay a little price for it somehow. And I believe there's some bipartisan support to finding ways that can be achieved. Nothing would break my heart more than somehow sending these people away, because I'll tell you, we need them.
Yeah.
Because, yes, we need them because they're an important part of our economy. Let me assure you, the biggest corporate benefactors to politicians in this country, losing 10 million consumers, is not in their best interest. But the overarching reason why we want to keep them is because that's what this country is all about. These people chose to leave their country and their lives to come here for a chance. My goodness, it's the least we can do to find a way to appropriately ask them to do something to rectify the wrong, because that's fair to both sides, and absolutely embrace and keep and nourish and include. And that's what I'm all about.
It's a pleasure meeting you. My name is Larry Nelson. Unfortunately, I'm a Richfield resident, so I live in CD5. We welcome all. I've done a great deal of door knocking in CD3 for Democratic candidates. Hopefully you'll be one of them. And to our Republican friends who are taking me to get my good side. My question, you mentioned about being a business owner and talked about a little bit about decent wages, things like that. How do you stand on raising the federal minimum wage?
Okay, the federal minimum wage. Let me start by answering the question by telling you that we all do better when we all do better. To that end, this is a real conundrum. And let me just share my personal story. One reason I opened this little coffee shop downtown called Penny's is because, first of all, I find it joyful to create enterprises and afford people the opportunity to succeed. That's one. But the other was, I wanted to learn what it's like to operate one unit, one little business in a really highly regulated municipality called Minneapolis, and learn what it takes, because we have a representative who claims to represent small business, and I am a small business owner. And I've learned a couple things through this process. on the minimum wage. We pay people $15 an hour. We started that way, did it for 4 months. We did it that way for 4 months. We were losing boatloads of money over those 4 months. So we have an employee, we have all kind of employee gathering every once in a while, and after the first of the year, we sat down with everybody and said, look, you know, we want everybody to share in the upside, and we ask everybody to share a little bit in the downside, and it's a struggle right now. So a handful of people started making $12 an hour, but with their tips, we're still over 15, so everybody was still over 15. And then we had our first modestly profitable month in April, and we took everybody back to 15, and nothing made me happier. But it was actually, what I loved about it was that here was a group of about 15 people who recognized that we're in it together, you know, up or down, and when they said, yeah, we'll take that little cut for a little bit, that's all I needed to know that I had the best team in the world. Yeah. Now, here's the challenge. We have a little coffee shop with a cash register attendant, someone who makes crepes, and someone who makes coffee. And the people who make coffee and crepes are trained. Someone went to culinary school and has some student debt. Someone's gone to barista school and training and has been probably working 6 or 7 years, you know, at the coffee machine. And then typically someone who's less experienced on the cash register. And I started realizing that we're paying everybody $15 an hour because we can't pay $20 to the coffee maker. Just, I mean, you cannot make this work. But the coffee barista and the crepe maker psychologically think, why should I be making the same amount as the person at the cash register? So what I realized is, now we got a real conundrum. Because any enterprise, and we're just one little coffee shop. Imagine a print shop that has 50 people. Well, it's the people who are making 15 or a little bit higher to begin with that suddenly feel, well, I'm worth more than that if they're making that. So everybody must recognize as we talk about this issue, let's start with the outcome, which is we want everybody to do better. But anybody who's a small business owner would know that that's really complicated if there's a mandatory wage that high. And here's what will happen. And I mean this from experience. One person of our 4 people per shift, we're paying 15 no matter what, but a coffee shop not like ours, who's paying right now $9.50 minimum wage, which is, by the way, what most do, about almost half of what we pay, they will cut one person probably from their shift, ask people to work a little bit harder. There will be a big black market of just cash paying suddenly. A lot of people are going to lose jobs, who are going to go from making $12 an hour to making nothing, and a handful of people making a little bit more, is what I think is going to happen. I'm not certain, but I'm fearful of that. So I just think as we talk about this policy, we should do so by testing some of these theories a little bit and recognizing we all want the outcome to be higher wages for everybody. And I know we can get there. I think we should provide incentives to companies to do that. We're an example. We've been doing this for 5 generations, well before me, paying people more than they ever could have imagined. Retiring as millionaires working in a production line and doing secretarial services because we think that's a principle that every company should embrace, and I'd like to see our government provide incentives to the private sector to do more of that, share more. So at the end, to answer your question, yes, I'd like to see an enhanced wage for everybody. I think we should be very cautious about how we go about it, and by all means, I am fearful when one municipality does it on an island, because rest assured, jobs will leave the city. That's just the truth. So let's find a way to work together, come about to a policy that works for everybody, and ultimately raise wages. But that's it.
Joel Benbow, Edina.
Hi, Joel.
Okay. I wrote to Eric Paulson about my concerns for climate change, and he wrote me back about what an avid Minnesota outdoorsman he was, but he didn't say one word about global effects. What do you think? Is the science still not decided?
Well, so I'm not an attorney, but I hire people that have gone to law school and over many years and have experience, and when they tell me this is the law, I tend to trust them. And when a scientist, or when 95% of the world's scientific community says that this is happening and it's caused by this, I'm inclined to believe them. So the answer is yes, I believe global warming is real, and I do believe the scientists that it is in part, not wholly, but in part caused by human beings. Regardless, and this is This is bridging the gaps. Regardless, it's happening. It's happening. And it should be incumbent on the most extraordinary country in the world to play a leadership role, as we did, only to have a president who is deciding whether to stay in the accord is just so troublesome to me. But that's the issue, is that we should be leaders in this. And you know, a carbon tax is one darn good possibility that could make a big difference. I think it's embarrassing to this country when China is suddenly considered to be at the forefront of change in this respect, and we contemplating whether to even stick around. So yes, I'm concerned. And boy, like I said, I've got 2 daughters. It is my responsibility to leave this place better than we found it, and I need your help.
Hi, I'm Rachel Winton. I'm from Edina. I just want to say, first of all, I actually worked as an intern on Terry Bonoff's campaign, so I know a lot about, you know, the ways to reach out to people, and I guess, so I go to school in New York. I just finished my 2nd year, and in New York, I go to a very liberal college, and everybody cares about politics. And here, especially after working on the campaign, I realized, like, just not that many people care, especially young people. And I would call people, and I mean, we only got to like 10% of the people we called, actually, we spoke to them. But, you know, a lot of people, they cared about the presidential campaign, but they didn't care about Congress. And I guess I just want to know, how are you going to make people care? Because I care. I didn't start caring until after the Orlando shooting. I realized that my congressman had an A rating from the NRA, and I didn't know anything about that before. I had to like go and do the work for myself, and a lot of young people and people in general just don't want to do that work, which I totally understand. So, you know, there are ways to like reach out to people by calling and door knocking, but I really want to know, how are you going to push the limits and really reach out to everyone?
Well, as evidenced by the people in this room, I think people are starting to care. That's one. 2, money in politics is a great corrupter of our democracy. And perhaps the most shameful element, again, bipartisan shame, is that only slightly over half of the eligible voters in this country made the choice to vote in what is clearly the most important election that this country probably has ever had in its history in the last election. Only 50% in a democracy. So your question about getting people to care is really, really important. I'll be the first to tell you, I would rather lose this election with 90% turnout than win it with 40. When I walked up here tonight, there were about 10 protesters with signs. You may have seen them. And, you know, I went up to each of them, I read their signs, I asked a couple questions, and I said hello, and I thanked them because they care.
Yeah.
And that's how I am. You know, if they're going to actually take the time to write a sign and show up here tonight, they're doing the same thing you guys are doing. You know, and many of you, God bless you, many of you are doing the same thing, you know, on our behalf, you know, to him. And I salute all of you. So people care. And I will also say this, I've been so amazed by the number of Republicans that have reached out to me and are going to support this effort, and the number of young people is the most important. And I believe we're going to have an army of both. I ask if anything you can do to inspire people your age to care would be wonderfully important, not just to this room and to me, but to this country. And there's a great legacy. This was going to be my close, but there is a great legacy of Donald Trump. And this man, because of who he is, has inspired this country in a way that it has never been inspired before. And believe me,
She just had it.
punchline. This is, you know, my dad used to say this thing to me. He's like, Dean, life is about turning chicken shit into chicken salad. And that's what this is all about. He has given us an opportunity, and he has done this country an extraordinary service just because of his ascendancy to the presidency, that people are going to care. And I know this next election was going to be one of the highest turnout elections this country has known in this generation, if not many. And we will, one day at a time, one person at a time, I believe this district, the 3rd district in Minnesota, will be one of the highest turnout districts in the country. And if that alone, if my candidacy or anybody else's inspires that, that is massive success. And that gives me great confidence in the future.
Thank you for coming back to the cheap seats. My name's Jessica Shortall. I live in Edina. Just moved here from Texas a few months ago. So I'm a refugee of sorts. Lived in state politics for a few years in Texas. Yesterday was sine die, and the Texas legislature erupted into a physical altercation on the House floor. A legislator called ICE on peaceful protesters. Death threat ensued from that same legislator. I'm a history nerd. I know I'm just terrified at the vitriol and loathing from both sides in this country more than anything else. It scares me for us ever getting anywhere. I think we need 2 functioning parties, and we need bipartisanship more than we ever have before. I know as a history nerd that this isn't our first rodeo. We've seen many generations ago horrific rhetoric from politicians about each other and political parties about each other, but it's still scary, and I would like us to end this cycle sooner rather than later. So I wonder, as a freshman, what concrete actions you could take to help move us in that direction.
Great. Well, I like to say that a lot of people are complaining about how broken our system is and how appalling this has all become. And believe it or not, our system was designed for days just like these. It is the most extraordinary system of democracy the world has ever known, designed to prevent men like the ones sitting in the White House from running rampant on a country that has taken generations and blood and sweat and tears to build into the most formidable, extraordinary country in the world. And to that end, thank you. And it's true, checks and balances are fundamental to our success. And it is times like these where the vitriol and the anger does spill over, but I would argue that is not a hardware problem, that is a software problem. That is the people in the system. I'd like to be, if I'm successful, I'm just one of 535 voices. Just one.
But you're my voice.
Thank you. Thank you. And, look at one voice. One even quiet voice with passion can make a big difference. I've seen it happen. I see it happen every day. And if this just starts with me, so be it. I think it's going to start in districts around this country. I'm going to shed that label for as long as I can to start presenting myself first as a human being that wants to represent you. And then sit at tables with people who feel as extraordinarily different than I as you could possibly imagine, and give a hug at the end of the day and break bread together and do a whole lot better. And hey, this is about selling possibility. I dwell in possibility every day. I dwell in it every single day. And it is possible. And the people in Washington, there's a good plenty of people in Washington who are willing to do that right now. I intend to make at least propose some changes that I think will make it a whole lot better. I can't tell you I can do it alone, but it starts with all of you. And if we can do this here, it starts here. And we'll be known for that, and I hope that's the case. And I am optimistic. You've been either saluting or waving for a long time. No, not that. No. Thank you.
Stan and Mindy Hargrove. We live in Wayzata. We're small business owners downtown Minneapolis. I was really disappointed that it was an hour and a half into the thing before anything about climate change. My question to you is a two-part question. One is, what's your sense of urgency about it? Where does it set in your priorities? And number two, what really do you think is the best policy approach? And I've heard really three things that make sense. You got the carbon tax, you got cap and trade, and you got a bunch of regulations. Go.
I've had the pleasure of sitting at a table with our former president, Obama, who I never knew was and asked him a couple questions. One was about campaign finance reform, which I can express later, but I asked him what, of all the issues he was facing at that time, and this is just a few years ago, of all the issues that he was facing, what kept him up at night? And I thought he would say Iran or North Korea, but he said climate change. And he said it staggered him how something that presented such a clear and present danger, probably less to us than a lot of the world, but to us as well, obviously, had received almost no attention, which is why he worked so hard to develop the accord that we are now unfortunately debating. And he said nobody can even put a price tag on what it's going to cost Miami and New York and San Francisco and coastal cities around this country when the seas rise just a few feet, which is not, I don't think that's not an if, that's just a when. Look at New Orleans. You know how many billions of dollars that cost us? Billions. So that inspired me. I came here tonight to listen to what priorities of yours are. Climate change is so fundamental because minimum wage doesn't mean a whole lot if your city's underwater. It doesn't mean a whole lot if you can't feed people in your community because the weather patterns have changed so substantially. And it's, as humans, we have this interesting ability to kind of compartmentalize things that we can't comprehend. And I think we simply can't comprehend, what is so frightening. And I'm not a scientist, but I do read heavily and I study, and I've read both sides. I believe it to be not a matter of, again, like I said, if, it's just a matter of when, and it has to be a singular priority. I do believe I don't have policy to present to you tonight. I do believe a carbon tax is the most obvious, and most importantly, the quickest. We don't have a lot of time. Some reports are saying that we're talking about a matter of maybe a decade until things really change dramatically, at the most. And a carbon tax would be the quickest way to make fundamental shifts in the economy. And we've done this before. When during wartime, entire industries are developed. And anybody who argues that by a carbon tax would kill jobs is simply fundamentally misguided. The investment that we would make in new energy to save the planet is massive. And as all you know, more people work in the solar industry now than work in the coal industry. Why do people talk about that? Right? So I believe that is the most important approach, in addition to some others. But when the rest of the world is getting on the wagon faster than we need new leadership, and I intend to try to affect it.
Hi, I'm Jenny Conan. I'm from Chaska. So I'm treating this like a job interview for you. I went to Brian Santa Maria's talk yesterday and I asked him this question, so I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'm just trying to compare your styles. So can you give me a specific example of a time where you had an opinion that differed from the group and how you went about either affecting change or working with the group to either find a way to convince them of your idea, or how you managed to compromise with the people who disagreed with you in order to affect change in the group? I'm trying to get a sense of what your style is for working, obviously, in Congress, if you get to go there, which I hope you will.
Well, I'm a father.
I'm a mother.
Your mother. So I would argue at the very top of my list is negotiating with my own children. I have faced so many examples of what you just referred to, and it is such a almost everyday occurrence in my life, managing businesses. and serving on boards of nonprofit organizations. And my style, so I'm not going to refer to a specific instance, but I will tell you about my style and my principles. And that is, every time I sit at the table with people who feel differently than me, I learn something. I learn a lot. And that's the joyful part of my entire life is doing so. So in all of my experiences, professional philanthropy, and even in relationships, I consider my style to be one of investigation and curiosity. And even down to my hobbies. I love archaeology. I like digging to find, to learn stories that are buried in the ground of the past. And I love varying opinions because, my father also used to tell me that if two people always agree, you only need one of them. So, and that's one of our principles. That was taught me by my parents. That's been my experience in business. It's been my experience in philanthropy. And I'm very sincere. We don't have all the answers in this room. There are some brilliant ideas that can be shared by people who might differ with us on a lot of other things that we should listen to. And shame on us for not, and shame on them if they don't listen to us. That's how I feel.
Thank you.
Bob Searles, Minnetonka. I'll make it short and sweet.
Thanks, Bob.
I'd like to know, since the last Republican candidate to reveal his tax returns was Mitt Romney, how he can get away with paying 11% and I'm paying more than double that.
Easy answer. Warren Buffett is fond to point out that his administrative assistant pays a higher tax rate than he does. Those of you who might be in financial services know there's something called carried interest, so where hedge fund billionaires pay this capital gains tax instead of a corporate income tax that is, to me, really misguided. It's such a shocking reality of our current tax system that's even allowable. That's a travesty, to put it plain and simple. The tax code absolutely, I think, should be simplified. It should be rectified. It should be improved. I think, again, there are ideas on both sides to do that. It's not fair in a country like ours. And by the way, I will go on the record as saying I think U.S. presidents should absolutely share their income tax. What bothers me is in a land of the free that we are, every president, at least in my lifetime and well before, has chosen to share his tax returns. And I say his or her, and we don't have a her. But that should be the prerogative of the president to do so. The fact that we're even talking about whether there needs to be a law is really too bad. But yes, when you're representing this country in the world, we need to know if you have conflicts of interest. And the sad truth is we've elected someone who we know does have conflicts of interest. We just don't know how broad and deep and wide. So, and gosh knows, I can't even imagine how low his tax rate was. But, that said, men like him, successful men like Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, I don't disparage them for paying low taxes. They have accountants that are holding them to the standards that the law dictates. It's incumbent on us to look at the system. And by the way, people who make great success should keep a lot of it. I hope they share a lot of it too, but they should keep a lot of it. I don't want to punish people and punish success. That's not America. But we should absolutely not allow people who make billions to pay such modest taxes, and people who work their butts off every day to pay so much in relative terms. And this all goes back to that incremental amount. A little bit more to a lot of people makes a fundamental difference. A lot more to those people doesn't make one bit of difference.
My name is Mary Rose Watson, and I'm from Maple Grove. And I want to know who's running your show and how they plan to use people who might want to work for you. I need to tell you where this question comes from. I've lived in Maple Grove for 11 years. And in 11 years, one candidate has knocked on my door. I have not seen any evidence by either party for it, get out the vote, either by door knocking or calling people on telephone. And I definitely think you need to use social media. But I don't have Facebook, so sending me a Facebook once a week isn't going to do it.
When you do get Facebook, I want to be your very first friend. All right, how about Snapchat? I said earlier that I would rather lose this with 90% turnout than win with 40. One of the measures of success in this campaign is turnout, absolutely. And I mean that across the board. I want Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, and anybody else to get out and actually mark that ballot. So that is fundamental to me. You asked who's running the show? I'm running the show, to start with. I've told the powers that be in Washington, D.C. that I want their support, but I do not want their command and control. I'm not their commodity. I'm not their lackey. I am not their proxy. I am going to represent the district in which I'm running. I'm going to keep money in this district. I've hired a local firm, Clockwork, to do branding and social media and website design. I'm hiring a local filmmaker to do some video pieces. I want to keep that money here instead of sending. The sad truth is this campaign will probably cost $20 million between the two sides. It's deplorable. And I use that word knowing how charged it is. It's deplorable. This is going to be a Minnesota campaign. I'm hiring a Minnesota team. I want Minnesota volunteers. I want support from wherever it can come, of course, when it comes to people helping me, but I want it from this district. That's how this should be. Representation should be about here. And the truth is, politics and campaigning is a multi-billion-dollar business managed out of Washington, D.C., in which a lot of people are making lots and lots of money. Like the healthcare system, it is completely misaligned with those who it is supposed to serve. The reason you see all these negative ads, by the way, everybody, they work. But the real reason you see all these negative ads on television is because television stations and networks pay ad agencies a commission, 10 to 15%. So if you were running political campaigns, and by the way, so agencies come to candidates and say, look, you don't have to pay us anything. We get paid on the commission. And candidates are like, well, it's wonderful. Well, so where's the incentive? It's to spend as much as humanly possible on television advertising, because that's the last medium that still pays a commission back to the agencies. So in many cases, campaigns will generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in income for the agencies. So this, you asked who's running this, I want it to be run here. It is going to be run here. I've made some people a little bit uncomfortable in Washington because I want to do this differently, and I intend to do it differently, and that's who I am. And I would love your support, whether you're on social media or not. And there are 700 and some thousand people that live in this district, roughly. I can't door knock every one of them, as much as I'd like to. I would love to see you up in Maple Grove. I can't promise a door knock, but I promise to represent your interests, and I promise if you want to help this campaign, there will be plenty of room for you.
Everybody sees my shirt here.
Oh, let me see it first.
What does it say?
It says, I do not like your lying ways. I do not like your hate for gays. I do not like your grabbing rump. I do not like you, Mr.
My name is Dottie Gilkison, Bloomington. Since we're talking about money, thank you. Since we're talking about money, Citizens United, how do we get the money out of politics?
Thank you. In my estimation, money in politics is the biggest corrupter of our democracy. It needs to change. If I intend to accomplish, we talk about some of the most important things, climate change, healthcare, and in my estimation, campaign finance reform, because I think that's the underpinning of what's wrong. Citizens United really troubles me. I wish that didn't happen. It's not good for either party. It's not good for the country. But here's another truth. This goes back to caring, the question you asked a little while ago. The information is there, everybody. In fact, when you go home tonight, Google Eric Paulson and where his money comes from. Okay, the good news is we do have a system in place whereby it has to be reported for the most part. Now, independent expenditures, which is Citizens United essentially, that's hard, and that's a big part of the problem. People can hide behind the veil of all kinds of things. But let's just start with what is available, and look at, not just Paulson, look at all the members of Congress and where the money comes from, and then look at their voting record. I mean, you know, Eric Paulson in the last cycle, 2016, if I recall correctly, received $335,000 from pharmaceutical companies. And that's just one of the many categories of receipts from corporate interests. And I don't have anything against a lot of those corporate interests, but I think you can draw some really nice little dotted lines from those receipts to the votes. And that's how this stuff works. You know, so let's look at what does exist. And I ask you to do that. Look at it, and don't just look at it. Look at everybody's. The system's a mess. It's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. And you look around the country. You know, it's interesting. I watched the French voted, a few weeks ago. And you know, it's interesting. They vote on a Sunday when people can get out and vote. The most extraordinary country in the world that celebrates freedom on July 4th, and we go at barbecues and we let out fireworks. You know, we celebrate that freedom, the achievement of the freedom, and yet we don't even afford people a day off to exercise the freedom.
You can get time off from your employer, it's a state law.
Sure, but it's not. I would argue that the practice of freedom in this case should be a holiday. We have a lot of other holidays.
Yeah.
It is the most. And I also believe we should condense campaigns. The fact that I'm doing this 18 months before an election is not fair to you. That should change. You know, there should be, I think the best models in the world have some degree of publicly financed campaigns. By the way, the presidential campaigns until unfortunately recently have been pretty successful in using public financing until now the caps have been blown out of proportion. So we can do it better. And Citizens United is troublesome to me. I'd like to see that overturned. I think if we're going to actually affect campaign finance reform, it's going to have to be a constitutional amendment. Yes. I think it's possible, but it's going to take extraordinary will, and it's going to take people like me exposing the truths. And I would like to see my legacy being that people not like me can run for office. Right. That people not like me with the resources that might be necessary to make this happen, that they should be able to run for office and be afforded the same chance and the same opportunities as anybody who has means and anybody who's connected to others. So that's a long answer.
Hi, my name is Sarah Dolan, and I also live in Maple Grove.
Hey, Sarah.
And the day after the election, someone wrote on the Maple Grove High School boys' bathroom the N-word and go back to Africa. And I'm raising a daughter there. And so I want to know what you're going to do about white supremacy. Thank you.
Well, I actually challenge you because I don't think there is white supremacy. I don't think there is such thing. We are not supreme. Human beings are supreme. And I say that tongue-in-cheek perhaps, but it's absolutely true. You know, kids who do that, learn it. You know, we're not, I remember my children in pre-kindergarten, when referring to friends, they had a number of friends of color, and one particular kid, I remember they were referring to this little boy, and it took me, I couldn't understand who my daughter was talking about. She said, the little boy who wears those shorts every day, and I couldn't remember. Who wears those funny shoes? No, I couldn't remember. The one who wears glasses? No. The fourth or fifth thing on her list was his color. And I thought to myself, how is it that like 5-year-old kids are oblivious? They look at the person, maybe the clothes, but the person. That means that they have to be taught that, They have to be taught that. There are parents teaching their kids to hate, and that sickens me. And we can legislate to some degree, but at the end of the day, I call on people of faith, and I call on churches, and I call on human beings, and I call on everybody who can make a difference in these lives to intervene in these kids' lives, because if they're growing up doing that, that's just the beginning of what's going to be a traumatic existence for both the perpetrator and those he or she affects. So to answer your question, do I have an answer for that? Other than compassion? No, not particularly. Other than certainly civil rights legislation and anti-racism laws, and we have some good ones in place. If there's something that you think I should know about that we should be doing, I would like to turn the microphone back to you because I feel the same passion for it. And because of my humanity, I find it so appalling and disgusting that I don't think it shouldn't be about laws, it should be about raising decent human beings. But I'd like to hear, do you have a proposition?
So I will support you. But I don't think you should start by saying that I don't believe in white supremacy. White supremacy is real. It's affecting people in Oregon. It's affecting people here like Jamar Clark and Belinda Steele. And so to hear you say that you don't think white supremacy is a thing is extremely hurtful, especially to someone who is not white. I'm an educator. I'm a professor at Penn University. And I'm a professor in the MLIS program. I'm teaching future children's librarians to be anti-racist in their work, working with young people, providing children's books that address a wide variety of social justice issues, and I will continue working hard to do that. But I need you to not say that white supremacy is not real.
Okay, I hear you, and I want to clarify what I meant by that, which is not that...
I don't believe children are not colorblind either. I agree with you that they learn this from their parents, and so that's where we need to work.
Right.
We need to work in education. We need to diversify the 96% of the white teachers in Minnesota. We need to get more educators of color into our schools, whether they are private or public or something.
Hear, hear. And I want you to know, what I meant by that is I do not believe whites are supreme. And that is exactly what I meant. I want you, I hope you...
Quote can be taken out of context.
Indeed, and you're right, and I apologize for that. Wholeheartedly apologize for that. I want to let you know, though, too, everything you just said is what I spend my days doing. I was a Minnesota reading corps tutor working with Latino and Latino kids in Northeast Minneapolis. I spend my days in North Minneapolis trying to rectify the wrongs that we've perpetrated on people. I've raised my kids to look at people's humanity, not their color, not their race, not their background, what kind of person they are. I understand, and I apologize from the bottom of my heart for if I offended you. What I meant to say is I do not believe whites are supreme. I think humans are supreme, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. The lack of diversity in our institutions, in our society, the fact that we choose to live with people who only agree with us for the most part or who look like us is deplorable and it's sad. And I hear you and I apologize deeply for offending you because I am not at all that guy. And I understand one thing, I'm not a politician either. Which is my biggest failing. And there are people filming this tonight, who are going to use that probably out of context. And I'll have to defend that. And it's because I'm not a politician, I speak from the heart, and I hope you know what I really meant. And I hear you loud and clear, and you inspired me. So.
Just to dovetail on that, what would you do about gaining more diversity in companies, businesses, schools, like officially?
What would I do to encourage more diversity in schools and in enterprises? I spend a lot of my time and our family's philanthropic resources in starting as far upstream as humanly possible to provide education and community and support and healthcare and even clothing to kids who don't stand a chance right now. Kids of color, kids from immigrant backgrounds whose parents don't understand the system. Because I believe the best work that I can do, whether it be in policy or my personal time, is going to the children and preparing them for those potential interviews and for those opportunities to serve and be wonderful, productive members in businesses and in schools. And I have worked hard in my nonprofit work, serving on the board of institutions, to implore more diversity. I serve as the director of the Walker Art Center, and you can imagine what my last 2 days were like. And I was the first person to call our board chair and call some other board members and say if there was ever an example of why this board needs to be more diverse, it's for days like this. So I believe twofold. Yes, we have a massive problem in this country. To your point, a massive problem that I understand and recognize. I choose to invest my policy thinking and my personal time and resources in changing a generation of kids so that they don't face those same challenges and persecution and walls and barriers and glass ceilings that their mothers and fathers faced. That is what I believe in, and I intend to do the very best I can do effectively.
Thanks. I'm Scott Smith from Edina. I feel compelled to preface this by saying I am indeed a loyal Democrat.
You're what?
I am indeed a loyal Democrat. But you haven't talked much about jobs or trade tonight. And for those of us who didn't grow up here, who grew up in factory towns that are now decrepit, which I did, to the unemployed steelworkers of Gary, Indiana, to the coal workers of Kentucky, to people like that in this district, how are you going to make their lives better, number one? And number two, what's your views on the nexus between trade agreements and employment in helping to make their lives better?
Thank you. Let me start with the trade question. In my experience, demand creates investment. Investment and demand create jobs. And the best way to afford that is to open markets to companies like I've operated in the past to sell our goods. So I do believe in free trade. I think it's actually a very powerful mechanism by which we can compete by creating jobs. I agree with those who say that some of our trade agreements don't exactly benefit us in the way that they should, and they should be improved. There's no question. But in general, I support free trade because I do think that's how we actually do better, and that opens markets to enterprises to sell their goods. That's the only way we can that we can grow our economy. To be honest with you, the question about how to promote jobs, especially in industries that are declining. The beauty of this country is that every time an industry declines, a new one is born. And all of you can relate to those extraordinary inventions that changed our lives. I remember the first time we got a VCR in the house, or a Walkman, or electric cars now, or solar. If we choose, and it is a choice, if we choose to create some job training programs that take people from industries that are now declining, train them to be prepared in industries that are now going to grow, and climate change can be our great salvation. If we direct our energies and resources into investing in ways to do better with what we have and preserve what we have, that could be the most extraordinary job growth this country's ever seen. So in general terms, I see both as possibilities. And this goes back to my earlier statement about investing in kids. If you train young people to be good thinkers, good thinkers, it doesn't, and passionate young people, it doesn't matter what they pursue, they will find their way better. And I think some of this is achievable in this current generation. I don't have all the answers. I want to listen. I think there are some things that we're doing right, and I think there's a lot we're doing wrong. But I think the answer is not in over-regulating or closing our trade channels. I really don't. I just don't think that's the answer. And particularly, I'm here to represent the people of the 3rd District. And a lot of the people in the 3rd District work at enterprises that survive on trade and manufacturing. And I would love to repatriate corporate profits that are stuck overseas because of our tax system. Talk about a huge boom to this economy, repatriating those corporate profits. Even if they're just spent on dividends and stock repurchases, that would be an extraordinary stimulus to this economy. And that's probably a little bit more of a Republican way of thinking. But I think that's how we can do better. There's a little bit of a nuance in that answer, because I think that is something that there's not a right answer. It's a little bit of both.
from Chanhassen.
Hi, Emma.
So what I want to ask you today, I think is a concern of a lot of us here. So our current representation is barely any. There's very little meetings where we can go to and actually talk to our candidate and have our voices heard. Secondly, I think especially we've seen with Donald Trump that there's a lot of talk about maybe like your values or what you want to do, but not a lot of like specific actions, especially that happens before voting. So I wanted to know what kind of specific things, I know it's early, but that you'll lay out, and also if you are elected, what you do to make sure that our voices are heard.
Thank you. So, again, I'll start with your second question, which to make sure your voices are heard. You know, the beauty of this day and age is there's so many mechanisms by which we can listen. You have to choose to do so. Unfortunately, a lot of our representatives just like to talk and put it out there, and I find joy in listening. I mean, this to me is the most extraordinary part of this whole pursuit, is getting in front of you and hearing what's important, and being reprimanded when necessary, right? And it's true. I mean, and being reprimanded and being challenged and learning what's on your minds. So that's just a promise I will make, and I do that selfishly because I love this. I love this. And I relish when people disagree with me. That's not the time to back down. That's the time to stand up and listen. So I will do that. To your question about specific policy, you know, I came here tonight, I have very strong opinions. I've shared a number of them with you. Some of them are probably aligned very much with your respective positions. Some of them probably a little bit on the other side of the aisle, because I'm pragmatic. You know, I believe a lot of times, I'm a big dreamer and I love revolution, but for the most part, success is achieved by evolution. And that's how we have to look at this. That's why I refer to Bernie Sanders. His ideas, there's some wonderful ideas. Free college education for all, free healthcare for all. Who doesn't want that? But we have to find a way that it works and that we can pay for it, and it doesn't sap this economy of everything that makes it good. So when you talk about policy, I'm here to learn. I'm not a politician. I've got a lot of experience, but not as a politician. And I'm going to try to bring that experience to this policy formation. And I'm a believer in redesign and innovation. And we don't have a lot of those people in Washington right now. Not a lot of innovators, not a lot of redesigners. So I will gladly answer any question you have about policy. I'll share my opinion. But I did not come tonight to share specifics. I've learned a lot. And every time I do this over the coming weeks and months, I promise you I'm going to learn a little bit more. And by the time November comes around, you will see a very, very well-informed, thanks to all of you, still not a politician, but someone who wants to represent you. We have time for one more question. And I think I'm going to go right. Orange, I was getting I don't know why. One more question.
This is not a question.
Oh, okay.
I'm Rondi Rayton. I'm from Eden Prairie.
Hey,
Hi.
nice to meet you.
I'm so glad I came tonight. It's been hard having Eric Paulson represent us. We have a gay son, and we've had great strides for gay rights. Yes. And it's wonderful. But going back again. And it just means so much to see you here saying these wonderful things, and I'm filled with hope for the first time since being elected.
Thank you. I can't believe I'm crying at my first. I'll tell you what. I chose the right person to ask those questions. And that's exactly why I'm doing this, and thank you all. I couldn't close with anything more than that. Thank you.
Yeah, he's trying to film it. He's trying to get the bad stuff.
But that's even better. Is it 48? I will make a point of it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I want all the candidates to answer my questions. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jerry. We'll see ya. Hey. Hello. I was telling my husband, I'm like, that's the girl I was telling you about.